So welcome to this Monday morning for some of us, pre-happy hour for others, namely me here in Germany. And I am here with Preston True. And Preston, you and I have known each other for years. You were one of my first real clients, and we did some amazing work together way back in the day.
Yeah, it was, and by the way, Elena, still get questions or acknowledgement and questions. Like, I love your LinkedIn profile. It's so clear. It tells you exactly what you're doing. Who did that for you? Because of course, most people who know me know there's no way, like the box of rocks that I am, that I couldn't create that on my own. So, like, kudos to
Yeah.
you for helping that. And I think that's actually where our relationship started.
Yeah, it is right here on LinkedIn. And it's funny because I am way in a different direction of doing LinkedIn profiles. But the positioning of that and learning about leadership and what it means to create a vision and drive that vision forward, um, I learned that from you first. It was just a really beautiful partnership there, Preston. So welcome to the ultimate question. My tech just went haywire over here, but I think that is my, yep, there we go. That was my iPad, not the actual tech. And it seems like it's going to be doing that, so that's fine. So welcome. If you're here, drop a hello in the chat. We are going to kick this off. Preston has an envelope in his hand, and let's see that envelope, Preston. And what's amazing about this is that is not the envelope that I sent from Germany, but I'm still kind of figuring out some mail issues. And so Natalie, Preston's wife, thankfully wrote the question down. So we have a little bit more energy in the mix here with the question today. And if you're new to this space, the ultimate question is a question that was born out of a conversation that Preston and I had weeks ago. And it was a question that came to me that I knew was specifically for him. And Preston doesn't know what that question is. It is in that envelope that is still sealed. And that's how we're going to kick off our conversation today. And what's really important to invite all of us into is that the ultimate question is inspired and created by the question in that envelope. And there is a huge dose of the unknown, as Preston doesn't know what it is. I don't know where we're going to go. And we're all just showing up for that because where we're at in the world right now, there is so much planning, so much control, so much thought that we can strangle something to create something. And we're here because we know that we need a different way. There is a more nuanced way to creation and connection and being real with each other. And that's what this space is about. So, Preston, I would love to turn it over to you before you open your question. And I'd love for you to give our audience a little bit of an idea of what they might want to know about you before we start. And if you want to know more about Preston, definitely check out his LinkedIn profile. But I'd like to invite you to share just a few tidbits about yourself, Preston.
Thanks, Elena. First, like, what a treat to share time with you once again. And in this context, I'm both excited and very curious about what this morning here in Detroit, Michigan, will have in store. It's interesting when you say happy hour for some of us. Is it happy hour on Mondays in Germany every week?
I mean, it's kind of happy hour of every day.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
I could go out and be by the canal or just outside my front door and somebody's having a good beer.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess a little bit about me. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a friend, a son, and a brother to a number of folks, and it's just, I guess, an entrepreneur. I guess technically maybe a business coach and guide, strategic business guide for some amazing entrepreneurs, primarily here in the States, a few in Canada, and just an opportunity to help organizations achieve their ideal level of fitness by designing and implementing business organizing frameworks. So it's a treat. It's the work that I'm here to do in this life. And it's just awesome to have met you years ago. You helped me out. I've helped you out. And again, this is the wonderful thing about running your own business or just simply deciding that you are going to make a major contribution in this life. So excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I want to invite you to share those two little things that you'd mentioned to me before, because I think that they're a beautiful insight into you in a slightly different way.
Well, it's interesting. So we're starting to plan out 2025 for our business. And one of the things that's in the background is a topic that's come up is a podcast. And, when you think about, all right, well, I'm going to put something out there to the world. Well, in the context of what? And it really boiled back down to really looking at like, well, where have I learned the most?
Mm.
How have I gotten here from wherever I have been previously? And one of the couple of things I realized was that although a classroom can be a great learning environment, it is not the only place we can learn. In fact, I found sometimes like the traditional classroom is constrained to some degree, and that there's, a traditional classroom is. We could look at the entire world, even a conversation like this, in a more granular fashion, that it's a classroom itself. And if we are willing to open up doors to any type of classroom that we might imagine, we can learn lots. And probably within any classroom, my number one teacher has been failure. I love success, I love winning, but I don't really learn that much from it. I learn a heck of a lot more when I get punched in the nose or set back and I have to figure out, how do I actually carry this burden that I've been confronted with? Usually when you figure that out, you realize you can become smarter, stronger, faster. So classrooms exist in any context, and failure is a great teacher. Those two.
I love it. I love it. And I can get right on board with that. And kind of the preface for this conversation between the two of us is we share some really beautiful similarities and outlooks on the world. And then we have these places where we differ. And I love that because no matter what our conversation is, I really learn from where that difference emerges. And so I'm curious, not any pressure to either one of us, because oh my goodness, but I'm curious how that will unfold here. And if you don't know me, I'm Elena. I think the two things to know about me today are I'm about to go back to a classroom, and that classroom for me is Japan. I'll be there for a month. I leave on Thursday. And my goodness, how much I mean, I'm excited to share some of what I will be doing there while I'm there. I've never really done that before, and it's such a huge backdrop to who I am and how I am. So I'll pretend that was two. It kind of was, because I'll be sharing stuff. And without further ado, Preston, we're all here for the question. So please send us off into the conversation.
All right. So in other words, let's open the envelope.
Let's open it.
Okay. Let's see what we've got here. Okay. Would you like me to read the question?
Please.
All right. What paradox continues to challenge you? I love that. So help me out. I think I know what paradox means.
Let's start there.
What is it for you?
For me, the way I've been sitting in paradox is two truths that don't seem like they can exist together, and yet they must exist for either one of them to actually be valid. I'll leave it at that. I have so much more to dive into, but that's what I'd say. How about for you? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, I've got two paths to go on. Both could end up in a desirable location. Both have obstacles along the way. One may be more challenging, one may not be as challenging, but I don't know that when I embark on the journey. And so it's almost like I'll win either way and I'll fail either way. And so, just kind of reflecting on the question itself, hopefully without answering it in the moment. It's the, what's the debate, or what's the conflict that I wrestle with on a regular basis, or the conflict, or the wrestling match, if you will, that challenges me. I think, if I'm recalling correctly, Elena, one of the things we talked about in a previous conversation was just this idea of being able to hold two competing thoughts in our minds at the same time. And it's interesting because I know, at least here in the States, and this is an example. It's not the only place it exists, but we're coming up on November 2024. There's a presidential election. You've got lots of things. You're bombarded with messages around politics right now, and it seems to be the marketing message is you've got to go in one direction or another. Like, there's no middle ground. I think that's okay. I mean, I can understand that. But again, it's one of those, like, is that actually how life works? Like, is there always a clear direction over to this way and always a clear direction over here? Like, I don't think, black and white, if you will. I think actually their life exists primarily as gray. And there's a constant process we've got to go through, a journey that we've got to unpack that grayness, to look for some of the incremental steps that we can take in a direction that we believe gets us closer to it. In my world, how do I say it? So I've been wrestling more with some personal relationships, family relationships. Like, they've hit some bumps along the way, and it's and again, somebody can correct us or correct me if I'm off track. Like, a paradox that's challenging me. So, kind of getting into answering the question, because, by the way, it's not just one. I would love it if we're just one. Like, there's one place in my life we could just go to work on, figure that out, and move on. How do I love family and not see the world the same way? And it's so it's interesting because that conflict, if you will, I'm called to love, and I translate the word love as willing the good of another. So it's not necessarily a feeling. Like, feeling love, if you will, is great, but, like, actually what does it actually mean? It means willing. For me, it means willing the good of another. So, like, that actually casts a wider net in terms of who I am called to love. Well, I am ultimately called to will the good of everyone I meet. So I could translate that to this concept of love. Well, yeah, but you know what? I am a Detroit Red Wing fan, and I got a family full of Chicago Blackhawk fans, for the hockey folks who are joining us. Like, that's a world like this, right? So, using that as a silly example, because certainly some of the things we're wrestling with are a little bit deeper than professional ice hockey teams. But it's that, like, how do we actually maybe not reconcile, but just kind of sit with, I've got this thing I'm wrestling with. And maybe this is just a conversation in a situation that's supposed to not be answered, but be a reminder that life is more complex than I would like it to be, and that relationships are more complex than I may want them to be, and that finding solutions to challenges is more complex than I would like it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your example of the hockey, because we can all easily extrapolate that to that feeling, that drive, that excitement. And a lot of times when we're thinking about these challenges, we're not necessarily going to touch into the excitement. We might touch into the pain, or just the confusion and the complexity. So that example, Preston, I feel like allowed us to simplify really quickly, so that I can then ask the question of, I like how you're presenting the idea of not reconciling. I think that that's part of the paradox of life, in the sense that we think that we're here to solve and fix things, that so much of how our Western culture is built is through that lens. And when we have these paradoxes, they must exist together to honor you, me, everyone else. And that's not meant to be reconciled. And then you talked about the complexity, and that the world is more complex than maybe you'd like it to be. And so I'd like to dig in deeper there in terms of looking at the actual source of the complexity. What what comes up when I pose that question? What's the source of complexity for you right now?
So there's um, we've we Natalie and I have two amazing kids. Henry 23 and Georgia 19. They're off on some great paths in their life. We are very fortunate that they're around us a lot. Natalie and I are in business together in this business. Um, and I share that as a backdrop of like there's a lot going on. We're incredibly blessed. We're incredibly fortunate to like this business seems to be working well, and we're involved with an amazing organization professionally called Pinnacle Business Guides. Just have an amazing group of colleagues throughout that. We've got our clients that we work with. We've got our personal friends. Our faith's an enormous part of our life. We've got an entire faith community that we're very engaged with. I share that from the perspective of like there's a lot going on, and then there's some family relationships that simply because of geography have been it's created some space. Like the geography's just created some space and some longer times in communicating with one another, because you're just not you're not right there in front of me every single day. Which certainly is an excuse, but it's the how much investment do we make in the relationship when sometimes we feel like, how do I say it? Like, where's the reciprocity? And it's interesting, Elena, because in this moment I'm feeling like I don't want to, I want to be responsible for judgment I have. In other words, I want to say it that way specifically. I want to be responsible for the judgment I have, because I don't believe any of us are without judgment. And those that say they are without judgment are simply lying, in my opinion. So, like, we all have judgment. So I'm judging, is it a sister, a parent that isn't as engaged in our relationship as I would like them to be? And is the burden on me? And it's like, well, wait a minute. Let's go back to like, I'm supposed to will the good of another, regardless of circumstance. And yet, why isn't that coming back? And, or how is it coming back? What am I missing that might have me realize that it actually is coming back? But it's not. So it's I guess the simple situation is that two sisters, awesome sisters, I just don't have the connection that I believe we can have. I believe that in my heart I would absolutely love to have. I'd like to say the same thing for them. But I want to be responsible for willing the good of another doesn't mean that I get what I want. And by the way, there's no animosity. It's like it's one of these situations or scenarios where I realize how truly blessed I am, knowing the community of people that we surround ourselves with, some amazing people who have far higher degrees of conflict and upset and sorrow in broken relationships. That's not where we are. And there's a gap. Right? There simply is a space that is an obstacle.
Yeah. I appreciate how you've brought it to relationships, because I think that is, I mean, that's the source of so much of our love and our desire and our creative energies and partnerships, and yet it's also where the differences emerge. And one of the things that you said that I feel relates so beautifully to the question, and I'm realizing now I should have the question printed here on the screen. Future me, take note. The question here is, correct me if I have this right, because I don't have it right in front of me. What paradox continues to challenge you? That's right,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
correct.
So that's the question that we're looking at. And when you said, Preston, that willing the good of another does not mean that you get what you want. I mean, I think that that is such an intense paradox, because I've just really been sitting in this place lately of wanting to be able to do something in order to have what I want, and it's just impossible. What I've wanted or what I thought that I want didn't exist, doesn't exist anymore. And to be in that, and to, like, one of the things that is tangentially related to this particular paradox is, just because I can intellectualize why something has happened, it does not mean that I get to avoid the feeling of what has happened. And my goodness, that is so, like, I mean, I'm looking at, for like, that those are two truths that for some reason we think that's a paradox. When we actually pick that apart, I don't think that there's anything paradoxical about it. There's the intellectualization and there's the emotional piece of it. Like, those two things are not necessarily, I mean, now that I'm saying it, it's like, yeah, they can necessarily conflict, but I think when we start to kind of go out and look at things more spiritually, we can start to see how those things are not really in conflict at all. They are just different levels of looking at the world and being in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting because if I really think about like the maybe more technical definition of paradox is there's a contradiction,
Yeah.
right? Like two ideas are contradicting one another, two
Mhm.
situations or outcomes are contradicting one another. It's interesting because that I'm gonna I'm gonna tie this back into like more just pragmatic kind of day to day how I experience. So I'm gonna go back to that, like, well, the definition of love, willing the good of another. So sometimes that somebody might experience me willing the good of them in the form of kittens and rainbows, and they'll feel warm and they'll feel acknowledged, and it'll feel good. But then what if I need to deliver some news that ultimately will help this person grow, help them become smarter, stronger, faster in some way, shape, or form? Or frankly, if I see them walking down a path that will lead to some type of injury, whatever that injury may
Mhm.
be, like that concept of love is like, hold on, Elena, don't go there. Like, you are on the wrong path. Like, that's a bad decision to make. If that the consequences that will come from that decision are going to get you in a lot of trouble. Well, you may have emotionally committed yourself to walking down that path and making that decision. And so my contradicting what you feel about your own decision may come as an affront. But here's the thing. It's like, I'm willing the good. I'm called to will the good of others, including you. And so, it's interesting where I find in the world of like more the more common world I find myself in the bit in our business, in working with clients, that decision making is one of the best skills we can manufacture, we can build. Now, where does decision making get stuck? I have found this isn't the only place. This is my observation. We get stuck in making decisions because we do everything possible to avoid undesirable consequences that may come as a result of that decision. Here's the thing. I've discovered 100% of the decisions I've ever made in life carries two flavors of consequence. Literally every decision carries both flavors. The
Mm.
first flavor is desirable consequence. The second flavor, undesirable consequence. For me to be here with you right now, saying yes and having this conversation, it's a desirable consequence of saying yes to you. But it also means I've said no to a whole bunch of things in the rest of life. And maybe somebody else requested this same time. And so perhaps I had to say no and disappoint somebody else, an undesirable consequence. So literally every single decision comes with those two flavors. I actually think that our wrestling with these two flavors of consequence is literally a paradox that challenges us every single moment of every single day of our life.
I want to pause, Preston, because I had an insight as you were talking about being here has meant that you've said no to all these other things. And I'm seeing that in a way of, for you to be in a space like this means that you have said no to all these different values and like the go, go, go. And because this space is of nothingness in a way, there's nothing that we're trying to accomplish here other than being with each other and engaging in this question in the most authentic way we know how. Um, Authenticity is also a very interesting topic of conversation around this. But yeah, just to opt into so many of the things that we are opting into as choosing it has meant that, I mean, that's on the back of millions of micro decisions and some absolutely huge astronomical decisions. So I appreciate looking at it that way, and as a way of both honoring what you've become to be here, and like I'm saying this for everyone too, right? Like whatever decision that you've made, what you've become to be here, and honoring that in a really big, bold, and beautiful way, but also to create more space around the fact that we can make these little decisions and they can just be little decisions. I think one of the biggest things that we forget about within decisions is that we make a decision and we don't just make it once. For you to show up in your business in the way that you do, for you to show up with your wife in the way that you do, your kids in the way that you do, those are decisions that are being made and made and made and made. And I think that there's a really beautiful dialogue there around what it means to continually opt into our lives and ourselves and the people that we love.
Yeah, there's, it's interesting. I'm like reading some of
Yeah.
the messages that are coming up, which are fantastic. So thanks to all for just your contributions, because it does, it gives some context. It certainly shows some, how I say, maybe alignment, or there's like we're all experiencing similar situations. So although there are many days where I think like, man, I'm the only one that's carrying this burden. Why me? But somebody mentioned something about like everything's a choice. When people say they can't, they're believing they're disempowered. I love that. Someone said to me before, you can start changing your language around can't. Change it to won't.
Hmm.
And it goes back to like, well, if I change my language from I can't do that, I'm like, I'm washing my hands of accountability and responsibility. Right? If I say it won't, it's communicating I'm making a clear decision to go this direction and not go this direction in this moment. It actually means, I've found it helps me in my commitment to go in the direction I've decided upon going versus have any baggage or blah 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 in the background about, well, what about this and how do I mitigate the undesirable consequence of saying no to this person or this situation. And maybe I'm probably the only one, but it's like the blah blah blah, and voice in the back of my mind that's usually the one that's always highlighting the undesirable consequences of decisions. But Elena, it's ultimately coming back to, yes, I mean, we do have to make decisions in every moment, and they're redundant decisions in many ways. But they're also, how do I say it? Building up some continuity in the decisions
Mm,
helps eliminate some of the potential conflict or paradox we might encounter.
mhm.
And so rather than being someone who decides based on, this was interesting. I think I want to give Jerry Seinfeld the attribution for this, but I subscribe to a newsletter. Shane, is it Shane Parrish, Farnham Street, I believe it is. Um, fs.blog, blog. It's fantastic. Really wise young man who has got a great podcast, but I get his Sunday emails, and he quoted Jerry Seinfeld saying, like, we could get all caught up in what people think about us. And Seinfeld basically said, like, that's just a bunch of BS. Like, what if we actually just said, I'm going here. I'm pursuing this mission. I'm pursuing this destiny. I'm pursuing the impact that I want to create. People are going to have opinions all day long. And like, I'm reflecting on that right now, thinking like, that's such a great way to just actually like eliminate paradox, like eliminate the conflict. It's interesting because in my faith life, the concept of reconciliation is a really powerful tool, like actually reconciling things that may conflict, or reconciling, well, just simply reconciling conflict that we carry. It's also perhaps a little bit of like cleaning up the messes that inevitably get made if we are willing to make decisions confidently, meaning I'm willing to make a mess with the undesirable consequences that my decisions will create versus along with, not versus, along with the desirable consequences that I'll get. But I think sometimes it's like, I could go back and forth and I could start making decisions based on what everybody else's opinion is. Man, talk about just creating a mountain of paradox for myself. It
Yeah,
seems crazy.
yeah. I'm also struck by the idea of when we don't care. There's a very specific energy to that I can feel, of like these decisions that have come to me that don't even really feel like decisions. They are directions that are so intensely clear for me that once they've arrived, I'm going, and I can recognize the energy around that as not being affected in the same way when other people disagree with that. And then there are other things, like especially when I got started with this business, I was very confused. And I think this, you were probably one of the first people that I was talking to about this. I was very confused about the idea that in the business world, we are told to have goals, and that if we don't have goals, we are not going to be able to accomplish as much as we could, or that we're setting out to. And that was a really confusing concept for me, because at that point I had done a lot with my life already without having set a single goal based on the energy I just spoke of. And of course, it's different when we have a team. I'm not saying that goals are bad. I'm bringing in the paradox of what it means to tap into this energy that pulls us along so strongly that when we don't have a team, we don't necessarily need to explain to everybody why we're doing what we're doing. And then, of course, there comes a time where that becomes incredibly important, say if we have a team, but also like if there's a message that we have to have that translation. Otherwise, it's a reality that we can only exist within. And I find that to be really interesting too, because now we're talking about the feeling and the way that things begin in us, and the space that we want to covet for that. And it should be coveted until that invitation is just so clear that now we need to look at what it means to bring other people in. And I talk about that specifically as being a translation. What is that translation of that feeling, so that you can create a reality that is bigger than just you and the way that you're existing within the world? Um, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Elena, because like goals for goals sake, I don't know if that's that valuable.
Hmm.
And so if I change the idea or invite all of us to consider that there is an outcome when we're pursuing something. I'm going to say it this way. There's amazing power, insight, and wisdom that comes from pushing against something. So, in other words, the idea of actually resistance, right? Pushing against something. If we have nothing to push against, we will likely end up all over the place. It'll, we'll probably experience, we will probably experience ourselves, and I would imagine others may experience ourselves as just zigzagging or spiraling all over the place. By the way, like Saturday afternoons, that's my spiral time. I don't want an agenda. I don't want anything to go like whatever comes to mind. Like, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to, whatever. Like, it's great. And at the same time, if that were my entire existence, I would struggle with that. Having some type of outcome or destination that you've said it's out further in the future than where I find myself today, and it's really desirable for me. By the way, the reasons that that's a desirable destination need to be clear in your heart.
Mm.
They don't necessarily need to be clear in all the minds of all the people that will ask, "Well, Elena, why are you doing that?" The pathway between where you are today and pursuing that, I found that's where the real value is. Like if you achieve that outcome, reach that goal, great. But I'm also finding personally and with every client that we've worked with over the last 11 years now, is like their value, what they say thank you for, what they say has been most meaningful to them is what they've learned from when they started to where they've arrived. And usually for most of them, they haven't yet arrived at the ultimate goal or destination that they set forth. But they're like, we're okay. Like we may or may not reach that, but we're so much further. We're so much smarter, faster, stronger along the way. And I've realized they've set that objective, that destination, that goal, and that the real value of that is they had something to push against. It's all the obstacles in the path between where they are today and that goal. Those are the obstacles. Those are the things they pushed against. They became smarter, stronger, faster. I have nothing more than like, I think the world of physiology or biology to, somebody said, well, Preston, you got to prove that point in some way, shape, or form. In the world of strength building, literally strength building, you lift weights. You don't just wake up and become stronger, like your muscular skeletal system doesn't become stronger. You actually have to push against some form of mass that is in conflict with gravity. And in that process, you break down muscle fibers. And when the muscle fibers repair themselves, they repair themselves as stronger. So you do that enough times over and over again, like you actually become stronger. Like it's the same thing. Right? So it's like, why not set that goal, that destination, push against the obstacles, the mass that's in conflict with gravity, and you ultimately end up a lot stronger, smarter, and faster. And it's been interesting because I reflect, Elena, when you and I first met years ago, you helped me on something that was very tactical in my business around LinkedIn. And to see where you have gone now, it's like, what a great testimony to saying I'm not so obsessed with this specific destination. I'm willing to let this journey help me kind of recalibrate what it may be. And that along the way is where most of that value exists. And by the way, there's going to be plenty of things that come up that we could call paradoxes where you are going to be in conflict, where one path is going to conflict with another.
Yeah.
And you're going to simply have to choose.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I appreciate that. I like the other aspect of even thinking about weights. There's the pushing, but there's also the pulling. And I think that where I sit, so much of it is the pull that I give myself to And one of the things that, if you know me, you've probably heard me say this a million times, but what we never know what we're creating when we're creating it. And so a goal can be so impactful to help us get there, and also limiting in the idea that what if we're not here for what we think we're here for? And allowing there to be enough mystery in the way that we're showing up. And I love, like, this is what I love about what we do, Preston, is that there is so much synergy here, and yet we can talk about it with just enough shade of difference to allow these paradoxes to fold into each other in their own unique way that only could be created in this exact moment with all these beautiful people here. So I want to, we're kind of getting towards the end here. We end in 5 minutes. And so I wanted to pose the question for you one more time as we come to a close, and ask if where you're beautifully holding that challenge of paradox.
Where am I?
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I open up the question, right? Natalie wrote this down. What paradox continues to challenge you? I see it now more clearly than I did 45 minutes ago. I immediately interpret a paradox as bad.
Ah,
Like, well, wait a minute. What if it's a gift?
yeah.
What if it's actually the thing I'm supposed to wrestle with today?
Hmm.
And if I can go back to I don't learn from sitting in a classroom listening to somebody. I learn by going out there and getting my butt kicked and experimenting and trying new things, and go down a path and it leads to failure, and edit my direction and re-navigate, and then end up with something with a more desirable outcome. The paradox is the thing we're supposed to just wrestle with.
Yeah.
It was an amazing. Well, I got to witness a terrific conversation. Bishop Robert Barron and Jordan Peterson having a conversation. It was something that they were talking about. Don't avoid shouldering the burden of catastrophe. Like, we're actually supposed to shoulder the burden of catastrophe. And I thought it's interesting because, like, who wants catastrophe? And yes, it creates a burden. But maybe what if we took on, like, we're supposed to shoulder it. And in that shouldering of that burden, we actually become smarter, stronger, faster. And again, it's not, somebody put in the notes here, is like a goal is directional. It's not deterministic. Like, you are not your goals. You are who you are. And ideally you become the best version of yourself. But again, I come back to paradox might just be a moment to moment, perhaps smaller, ideally lower level catastrophe that we actually get to shoulder every day. And that when there's, idea A and idea B, and we're being asked to choose between the two, choose.
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be some catastrophe when you don't choose B if you chose A, or vice versa. And so wrapping that all up, Lane, it's like I realize what's the opportunity that paradox continues to present to me. I might change the question to be that.
I love that. Yeah. And I when I was writing that question, I liked the idea that paradox and challenge were coming together, because for me, when I see a paradox, there's something to lean into. Anything that's worth living, in my mind, contains a paradox. It is that choice over the other, and these are life choices. So it's not like whether you want the Snickers bar or the Milky Way. You'll be able to compare those two things and know if you chose wrong. But you're never going to know if this was right to show up today or not, because you showed up today and that's it.
Yep.
So yeah, I thank you so much for being here, Preston. And I want to give everybody a very clear way to connect with Preston. He is on LinkedIn, as you might have seen. Obviously, we're both here, but your website here, gettpafit.com. This is where you can connect further with Preston. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor. And yeah, for those of you new to me, please connect with me with the Reframe newsletter. You can find that here. And there's a whole archive of all of these conversations as well. And Preston's will be up. So if you want to revisit this conversation in any way, shape, or form, theultimatequestion.live is where that archive can be found. And so, yeah, Preston, thank you. Is any last thought for us as we launch into the rest of our days?
Uh, Probably just embrace the idea of paradox. Don't look for the, how do I say it? Don't look for the best answer. Look for
Mm,
the right answer that gets you closer to what you are working to create. Gets you closer to being the best version of yourself.
beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. Your comments were amazing. I'm looking forward to going back and checking those out now. Have a wonderful rest of the day, start to the week, and